Welcome to Chapter 4 of Getting Seen. In this video, we're going to look at where your resume goes. Let me go ahead and tell you what I've got in store for this chapter. First off, we're going to take a look at what we've already learned, just as a refresher, and then we'll look into who handles your resume. I'm going to actually show you the process that your resume goes through. Essentially, it's kind of like a chain, and then we'll look at the 10-second scan, the 30-second scan, and a hidden agenda. Those three elements, the 10-second scan, the 30-second scan, and the hidden agenda, you can look at those as hurdles that your resume has to jump through in order to get you an interview. And I'm going to explain what each one of those is. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and have a review. So let's talk about what we've learned. We know that resumes are teaching tools. Your resume is not a marketing tool. It's a tool that enables you to teach a student. You're the teacher, and the hiring manager is the student. We also know that to be the best teacher, you've got to understand your student. And we talked all about resume reconnaissance, which puts you in that proper position where you can understand your student fully. Now what I want to do is give you kind of an inside peek at what's going on behind the scenes. We're going to look at who handles your resume. I want you to imagine for a minute that you're a recruiter or somebody that works in human resources. And you're going to look through 1,100 resumes for one single job opening. Think about what processes you might go through. And that's not uncommon at all. Recruiters and human resources staff might very well go through 1,100 resumes for just one job opening. What if you had to fill 50 job openings? What would you do? Well, I know one thing that you'd do. You'd try your very best to see if you could streamline the process. You'd try to see if you could whittle down the time involved in screening those resumes. Because we're talking about going through over 50,000 resumes. Some of that, sure, gets taken care of with electronic screening. But at some point, a real person has got to sit down and take a look. And let's see how they do that. There's a lot of variation out there in the whole receiving and processing of resumes, and that varies a lot from company to company. Some will use recruiting firms, and they're literally going through thousands and thousands of resumes, and they essentially separate the wheat from the chaff and present the ones that they think are viable for that job. And then others will go ahead and they'll look at the resumes themselves. They'll take care of it with an internal human resources department. But let's take a look at how a recruiter handles this at a recruiting firm. A recruiter is essentially like a funnel. And a funnel has one end that's really big and lots of stuff can fit in there. And the other end's very small. Only a little bit can come out. And that's the way it works with a recruiter. A whole lot of resumes get dumped in. Okay, but the recruiter is again going to separate the wheat from the chaff. And only a few resumes are going to come out at the other side as far as trying to fill a specific position. During this phase up here, they really don't care anything about who you are or what you do. They just want a ton of resumes. They want a lot of material that they can go through. And then they're going to sort all that out, and what they get on the other side is the ones that they're going to present to the company. Now, the reason they've got to do it like this is because they've got a lot of customers. They've got a lot of people, a lot of companies that are looking to fill positions. So they need absolutely as many resumes as they can get. And then what they do is they see if your criteria, your credentials, match up with the requirements for the job opening. And then if they do, they're essentially like a matchmaker. They match your resume up with the position that is open in that particular company. So the reason they want a lot of resumes is because the more resumes that they have, the better the chance that they're going to actually be able to get a perfect match. Now, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Let's say that you've got a real bad work history, that you don't work at places for very long. They still want your resume. And the reason is they may very well get a client that says, look, we've got some specific skills that we need for this position, but we don't want to pay a lot. And we're okay with taking the chance if this person is going to work out or not because we don't want to pay a lot. So they will actually look at your work history and they'll figure out, this fellow seems to have some problems, but he's got those specific skills. So they'll go ahead and submit your resume to that client. They'll hire you with the idea that you're going to be highly monitored. And then if it doesn't work out, they're just going to let you go. So again, they want everybody's resume just in case, because again, they have a lot of different types of people that they need to put in those different positions. And keep in mind that recruiter is working for the company. They hired them. So they're not on a relationship with you, really. They don't really care about meeting your needs. They care about meeting the company's needs, because that's who's paying the bill. Some companies, though, they don't hire out to a recruiter. They've got an internal human resources department, and they're going to do all the screening in-house. One thing to keep in mind here with this is that human resources people don't just do, resume reviews and hiring. They've got things like employee benefit packages that they have to deal with, investigating complaints against other employees. They've got to discipline employees. Maybe somebody violated company policy. And they've even got to terminate, employees if they do something wrong that justifies that type of action. What that means is that HR staff are generally pretty skeptical about people. They're actually from point A, they're already on the defensive. They deal with a lot of people. They have to deal with a lot of people that have done something negative. And a lot of times they're actually trying to protect the company from its own employees. Okay, so they're actually, from the very beginning, approaching your resume with that mindset of protecting the company. So they're looking at you kind of like, okay, what's wrong with this person? What are they trying to hide with this resume? That's how they're approaching you. But the important thing here is that whether the company uses a recruiter or they take care of everything in-house, eventually, more than likely, your resume is going to end up on the desk of someone in HR, because that person is going to try to determine whether you're going to be a detriment to the company, whether you're going to cause problems. So we've got the recruiter and we've got human resources. Who else is going to see your resume? Well, probably a receptionist or an administrative assistant. A lot of times with companies, maybe they accept resumes online. A lot of times that email gets sent to a receptionist or it gets sent to an administrative assistant. And this is very, very important. I'll tell you more about this later on. But this is very important to know, because a lot of times these people, they don't really have a clue about the job role that you're going to be performing in that position. And again, I'll tell you why that's so important here in just a little bit. Usually your supervisor, your potential supervisor, is going to get involved. So the person that's going to be over you, they'll probably take a look at your resume. They're going to be looking for things like, a supervisor is pretty busy. They don't want to hold your hand through the job. So they're going to be looking for signs that show them that you can do the job without them having to hold your hand. A hiring manager might also see your resume. And I'm mentioning a lot of these terms. This is not something that's going to happen in every single instance, because companies are different. Some companies don't use recruiters. Some companies don't even have a human resources department. A smaller company might actually have the hiring manager do everything. They're going to do the screening. They're going to do, eliminating resumes and then do the actual hiring at the end. So when you hear all of these terms, hiring manager, recruiter, HR, or human resources, what I want you to think about is the role that's being played in that given situation. Don't overanalyze the terminology itself. Just think about what is being done at that particular moment. Now we've got the 10-second scan. And this is what I was talking to you about earlier with, for example, a receptionist or an administrative assistant. Believe it or not, the very first person that sees your resume might not be a recruiter. It might not be somebody from HR. A lot of times it's actually no more than a receptionist. And it's not that, a receptionist is a bad person, but they're probably not familiar with every position in the company. Here's the thing, though. Most companies have websites, and on that website, there'll be a page that has current openings, and they just list, whatever positions they happen to have available at the time. So you can go in there, you can submit a resume for a particular position. A lot of times, that gets sent via email, and it gets sent to a receptionist or maybe to an administrative assistant. So they're the first person that's very likely to see your resume. They're only going to scan over it 10 to 15 seconds. That's the time that you have to make an impact here. Now, since they're not familiar with the role itself, okay, they're not familiar with maybe the technology that's involved, their judgment is going to be primarily based on the overall appearance of the resume instead of the actual content. So they're looking at aesthetics. And believe it or not, they're making a determination. They're making their judgment on whether you know what you're doing or not based on aesthetics. So your resume's got to look good enough so that somebody who is untrained, somebody that's not familiar with whatever that role happens to be, that it's convincing and shows that you have the right qualifications. So you've got less than 15 seconds to convince them that you've got all the basic qualifications, you've got the experience, education, and you've got the ability to fill that job opening. Let's look at an example, and I'll show you what I mean here. We're going to talk about a position as a web developer. So you're applying for this position at a software company. You're probably going to fill your resume up with accomplishments, including a description of projects that you've worked on, things that you've successfully completed. The thing is, if you didn't list, for example, specific keywords, specific programming languages like HTML, XML, or SQL, even though you did, you specified some projects that to a web developer, obviously I had to know HTML in order to accomplish this. Well, if you didn't specify that, though, to an untrained person who's not familiar with your job role, just because you put that you did this task or that you completed this project, they don't know that that means that you had to know HTML very well in order to accomplish that. So they're not going to see HTML on your resume. Guess what? They're going to file that in the nice little round filing cabinet next to their desk. So here's your takeaway from this slide. Make sure that you list specific qualifications, and that's keywords and phrases, buzzwords, things that definitely pinpoint specific skills that you have for that job. Another example for this is if you're going to apply for a job as a bus driver. Don't just put that you worked at other places as a bus driver. Okay, put that you have a CDL if that's one of the requirements. Never assume that they'll just know that you have to have that, because again, the first person that sees your resume a lot of times is not somebody that's familiar with your job. Now let's take a look at a resume. You don't have to worry about the actual content of this one because we're not dealing with that right now. We're just looking at the basic layout of it, because believe it or not, just the mechanics of this, where things are set, for example, that's been studied very well, and there is some statistics, some rules of thumb, that if you go by, you'll increase your chance of that resume making the cut. For example, most people start reading, believe it or not, they don't start up here. They start reading, if we divide this into thirds, they'll start reading at the bottom of the top third, so right about here, and they'll read all the way down to the middle of the page. So this right here, this is your prime real estate. If you want to make a point, you're going to make it right here. And based on what they see there, they're going to make a very quick decision to either throw that resume away or go ahead and read some more. And I mean, this is no secret. Okay, most hiring managers and recruiters even would tell you that they really don't have time to read every word on there. So the fact is, the truth hurts here, but 85% of all resumes get eliminated in the first 10 seconds. That means they fail that first test. So if your resume doesn't present itself in that prime real estate area, if it doesn't present itself in that 10 to 15 seconds, then it's simply rejected. It doesn't matter if you are the perfect person for the job. It doesn't matter if you're the most qualified. If you can't relate that in 10 seconds, then it's over. Now, after they look at that lower third part to the middle, then a lot of times they move on and look at the companies that you've worked for. They look at the position that you held and maybe even how long you were there. Then they're going to just scan and skip around, really, and look for keywords, specific things that tell them you know anything about this particular job. And during this whole 10 to 15 seconds, they're taking in, again, the visuals, the aesthetic appeal, how readable is the resume. They're getting a feel for all of that, and they do it very quickly. So what that means is if you've got a lot of, let me go ahead and pull up this sample here again. If you've got a lot of long paragraphs, which we don't here, okay, if you've got a lot of long paragraphs, that's really hard to read. It becomes, in fact, painful. Most people would rather look at little bullet points like this. See, I've got short bullet points, specific. That breaks things up for them visually. And I'm sure if you've ever read a long article or even a book, and let's say that it's got maybe 5 or 6 sentences in a paragraph, and it's extremely long, a lot of times you're tempted to not read the whole thing unless you absolutely are bound to that content and you really need to get something out of it, and you force yourself to read. But if you're not, for example, if you're just reading something casually, you're going to skip through it. Everybody does that. So what you've got to do with your resume is make it easy to read. Make it so that they can move their eye. And if you've ever seen those eye movement studies, they're very amazing. They show everywhere that a person's eye jumps while they're reading. We all do it. The eye just moves around from place to place. Even, you'd be surprised, even if you were going to read a line straight across like this, your eye might actually, jerk all over the place. So the easier that we can make it for somebody to get to absorb that information, the better the chance that we have. Another thing they're checking for while they're scanning is, for example, misspellings or even grammatical errors. Anything that seems like you didn't take time and properly prepare this, or that you're probably not detail-oriented, any of that kind of stuff they're looking for, and they're going to pick up on it. What they want at the end of this, remember, is a small list to go through. They want a small list of people to interview, because if they start out with 1,100 resumes, they don't want to interview 1,100 people. They want to interview just the few that they feel are possibly a candidate. And if they hold on to your resume, that means that later on, somebody's actually got to interview you. And your takeaway from this is 10 to 15 seconds can make or break the possibility for an interview. If you happen to pass that 10-second scan, then they're going to move on to the 30-second scan. Now, this might not be performed by the same person, but typically if you do pass that 10-second scan, then the resume is going to get another 30-second scan, and that is usually done by somebody that knows a little bit more about the position. And that's usually done by an HR employee that has the specific task of protecting the company from people, both insiders and outsiders. So that's people that are already employees and people who would like to be employees. So they're going to check out and scrutinize your resume, and if they smell anything that looks like trouble, then your resume is going to be recycled. Because of the role that HR employees have, with dealing with these people, they're very jaded. They're extremely skeptical. That's with employees and, again, any outsiders as well. And at the end of the day, there's only going to be a very small handful of resumes that make it past that 30-second scan, because, again, they're going to scrutinize it with much more intensity. They're going to be much more discriminate. And the odds that your resume is going to make it through that 30-second scan is actually less than 0.5%. The 30-second scan is much more subjective. They're looking for clues to your personality, things that stand out in the resume. They're looking for things like professionalism, honesty, dedication, friendliness even. And a lot of times it's hard to get that kind of stuff out of a written document, but they'll try anyway, and anything that appears to contradict any of those traits that they're looking for, that's going to throw up a flag. They're looking for things about you that say maybe that you're egotistical, maybe you're a religious kook, or maybe you're just way too into sports and it just runs your life. They're looking for things like that. Now, that doesn't make you a bad person. They might be your friend outside of the company, but they don't want somebody that's going to cause a problem inside the company, because that problem is going to be their problem. And remember, they only succeed, their job is only done when they filled that position. That goes for recruiters and HR personnel. So really, there's no advantage in them taking the chance if you're a questionable candidate. Okay, so where next? We've already gone through the initial electronic scan, and then we're going to move on to the 10-second scan. If we pass that, we move on to the 30-second scan. And if we get past the 30-second scan, we're going to end up on the desk of the hiring manager. This is the person that's actually going to perform the interview. They're the one that's going to make the decision to hire that person for the job. And obviously at this point, you're going to get the most scrutiny over that resume, because the hiring manager is actually more than likely familiar with the requirements for that role. And if they're not, then they're going to go and find the supervisor, somebody who is familiar with the role, and they're going to talk to them. They're going to find out what they need to know. They might even take the resume with them and, show it to them. Now, here's the trick. If they take your resume to somebody that's going to be a supervisor or a coworker, and your resume looks a little threatening because maybe you've got more experience, more education, believe it or not, that could hinder you. And the reason for that is the hidden agenda. It is sad but true. This is a fact of life that you're going to have to deal with. Even if you're the most qualified person for the job, your resume might not get you the job because you might be dealing with an insecure hiring manager. A lot of times, someone who is insecure, they're going to be threatened by a candidate that has impressive credentials. So if you've got those skills and you've got that education and you've got it all, believe it or not, they might put you on a shelf and talk about you to others as somebody who is not going to be a team player because you just know too much. And it's sad for both, you as a candidate, and also the company's going to be missing out because maybe you could actually you could supply them with something that they really need, but you're going to get crossed off because you look too threatening. So you actually have to be careful with this. Besides just the technical screening, you also have to worry about the fact that we're all human, and you have to deal with that humanity. And another aspect of that is stereotyping. That is alive and well. If, let's say, for example, they just had an employee that they had to fire, and he went to a specific university. If that same university is listed on your resume, guess what? You just got stereotyped. Happens all the time. So whenever they're looking at your resume, they're going to see that university. They will, maybe unconsciously, they will associate your resume with that employee. Now, on the positive side, fortunately, that works the other way as well. So if they have a good experience with an employee, maybe they have a hobby, or again, they went to a specific university. If your resume matches up with one of their star performers, people that they've got that are really effective in the company, they're going to associate you as well. Again, they might do it subconsciously, but that stereotyping is there, and it can work for you and it can work against you. Now, let's talk about the three objectives, three very basic objectives that the hiring manager wants to accomplish. There are really three goals that they'd like to accomplish, and they want to hire somebody who is truly qualified for the position, somebody that's easy to work with, and that's going to help accomplish the business goals of the manager. Not somebody, they're not looking for somebody to be buddies with. They're not looking for somebody that is trying to climb the corporate ladder. They're looking for somebody that's going to be easy to work with and really accomplish those goals. If they're a good manager, then they have got goals set in place, and they're going to be looking to see if you can fulfill those. And they want somebody that's not going to make the hiring manager look bad. Remember, we've got that humanity issue to deal with. They don't want to look bad. And I don't want you to be downcast or make this look more difficult than it is. I mean, it's not easy. It is something that's going to be difficult because, again, we've got the technical issues that we've got to deal with, and we've got humanity, things that just might happen and just might prevent us from proceeding. But if you do pass those three scans, the electronic scan, the 10-second scan, and the 30-second scan, you've laid the foundation for an interview. Let's go ahead and review what we've learned in this chapter. Who handles your resume? We've gone through everyone from the very beginning. Receptionist, a recruiter, HR staff, hiring manager, possibly supervisors and other coworkers. You're going to have the 10-second scan and then a 30-second scan, only if you pass the 10-second scan. Remember, the 10-second scan is very cursory. They're looking for aesthetics. They're looking for keywords, things that are going to pop out at them. You want to make sure that the middle third, that's your prime real estate, and that's where you're going to focus. Put those keywords and make things real easy to read. The 30-second scan is more in-depth. It may or may not be performed by the same person that did the 10-second scan. But only a handful of resumes are going to pass this 30-second scan. You get past that, you've got a real good chance that you're going to get an interview. We also talked about hidden agendas, things that we're going to just have to deal with, things that you might not even know that you're going to have to deal with. So you have to prepare your resume to go into the battle and be formatted appropriately so that it's going to be able to, your resume is one of those things that you have to get ready to do the battle for you, right? And then it goes out and fights the battle and you're not there. So you have to make sure that your resume is prepared properly, that it's got everything that it needs for whatever challenges might come up. And we talked about the 3 basic objectives that the manager has. They want somebody who is really qualified. They want somebody that's easy to work with and is going to actually accomplish the goals. And they want somebody that's not going to make them look bad. That's it for this chapter. Up next, we're going to look at before you begin to write. I'm going to help you with some essential skills that you need to know to put that resume together, to put all the ingredients together in a way that'll be easy for them to comprehend.